Yeah. Ketan, can we start the webinar?
Yeah, so we can start, sir.
Okay. Yeah, good morning, everyone. I'm Arjun here, and thanks for coming for the registering and logging into the webinar. It was definitely at a very short notice. Normally, we give at least about a week minimum for people to block their times, but we did feel that the the current behavior of financial markets, especially with the headlines of the rising U.S. Treasury yields. Is my audio okay, Ketan?
Yeah, your audio is fine, sir.
Okay. The rising Treasury yields is we thought it would be the right it did call for a quick webinar because there has been a lot of questions.
Sorry, sir. Sorry to interrupt you, sir. So I think your both the devices are unmuted. So maybe you can mute your.
Right. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. This is fine.
Yeah, this is fine.
I'm sorry. Yeah. So this is a burning question. The way the markets are behaving. So what we have seen clearly now is a first wave. We did see some very sharp sell-off in equities in emerging markets in the last couple of days. We saw bond yields rise substantially across the globe, right? We right from Australia and New Zealand to European bond yields to obviously the US, and also in India, we have seen bond yields rise. And we have seen minor weakening in currencies. Now, so with all this, so the questions we are addressing today is why is a spike in the US Treasury? Is it a false alarm, or is it something that we need to really worry about? The second is will it cause financial market instability in India? And the last time we have seen the past few times we have seen US Treasury yield spike, we have seen very sharp sell-off, at least in bonds and the rupee to a very large extent. And the third is, what should investors do? So this is our agenda for this today. I will talk more. I'll just take you through a few slides which we have, but the main part is I will explain why the whole process has started, what can be the potential, and what are the main areas that you need to worry about for risk management, right? And I'm sure if you're an investor, you have worries on your investments, and most of you here are wealth advisors and financial advisors working for wealth management firms or proprietary firms or asset management companies. And this is the question all your clients will be asking. And we'll try and answer all the questions. We'll have a longer Q&A than what I'll talk now, if you really have any questions. And then we can hopefully by the end of the seminar we can have a definitive perspective on what can be done for investors, right? So can we go on to the first slide, Ketan? So the first is clearly, I mean, the US Treasury yields have spiked, right? And the spike has been substantial. Now, if you take the pre-COVID, it's now it's gone to 1 year highs. At around yesterday it closed at 140, but it touched 160, and I mean that's to be expected because very sharp sell-offs. Then there could be some short covering, but it had gone down to a low of 40 basis points, right? And then the moment upwards has been about 120 basis points. And if you look at this, and if you look at the 30-year US Treasury, it's around 230. That is also very high. Right now, clearly, I mean, in the US, longer end treasuries affect the mortgage rates. And so that's a worry for the Fed. So even if they start to buy long end treasuries, which they did last time through Operation Twist, will the markets actually give it to them? Because one is the biggest issue is the supply. Now, with the US going full hog on the stimulus program, they're releasing 1.9 trillion more. And Yellen is calling, the new Treasury Secretary is calling for more stimulus, right? So right now, central banks are telling the governments, don't worry about debt. You print as much. I mean, you borrow as much as you want. We'll print as much of money as you want. But unfortunately, you have markets there, and markets don't believe that, right? Now, so why is the treasury yield spiking up? And most importantly, what you need to look at is not the absolute level of the 1 year, 10-year treasury yield. It's the steepness of the yield curve. So if you go to the next slide, we can see how the yield curve is steepened. Ketan, can you go on to the next slides? The 3 month and the 1 year is closer to 10 basis points, and the 10-year is 1.4%, right? So you have 130 basis points. So the curve has steepened by at least about 110. The short end has remained stable, and the long end has really steepened very sharply higher. And why is this? And what is the main cause of this sell-off in the long end bonds? Is clear. Now, the market is saying that given all the stimulus due to COVID and the fact that the short end rates are at 0%, there is a huge amount of, there could be a strong growth going ahead, and inflation could spike, right? The Fed is saying that we will keep rates at 0% till 2023. And even if inflation goes to 3%, which is 1% over their inflation target of 2%, they are happy. They'll say they will continue to run the whole stimulus program, as an accommodation program, and they are urging the governments to borrow and borrow and borrow and spend, right? So, but what is the market fearing here is, now the question is, if all this is happening, now the markets are worried that should they hold bonds at 0.4%, or even 0.5%, or even 0.6%, or even 1.4% or 1.6%? What is the right rate, yield at which the market is comfortable holding the bond? Is it 2%, or is it 3%, or is it 4%? We don't know, right? The market could just come and say that tomorrow they'll say that inflation may not go up at all, and so we will even be comfortable holding at 1% or even below. But that we don't know, right? So right now the market is really concerned about holding bonds at lower levels of yields. So that's why there is a sell-off. The second most important point is, I'll take you at the end of we have the currency charts. But the dollar, given that the US government is like going into huge debt, US government is going into huge debt, the dollar is, and the Fed is printing money, $120 billion a month they're buying bonds. You will see the Fed balance sheet is bloated up substantially. And I think in the next couple of years, it will be about 50 to 60% of total US debt. Now, the markets are saying that the dollar is, they're losing a lot of value for the dollar. So the dollar index has fallen sharply against all majors. And that's why you see the very sharp inflows into emerging markets as well. So India has seen a huge amount of FII flows in equities. In debt, actually, surprisingly, the flows have been negative. And that's largely because the foreign investors are worried about the huge fiscal deficit that we are running at the government borrowing program, and the fact that RBI is struggling to actually manage the government borrowing. So, because of the dollar index falling, the US dollar, the appetite for foreigners to actually invest in US treasuries is weakening. One is because at the short end, they don't want to invest at such low levels because they get nothing. And at the long end, because the yields are rising, they're worried about inflation. And the third is They are worried. They are seeing the dollar value fall substantially. So all three put together makes foreigners not wanting to buy U.S. treasuries. So who will absorb the all the bonds that are being offered by the U.S. government? Obviously, the Fed is one, but the Fed can like theoretically continue to keep on buying and buying and buying. But what it will technically do is then make dollar the weakest currency in the world. Nobody will want to hold dollars. We have not really focused on Bitcoin here, but if you have seen why mainstream is now going into Bitcoin is because there is a loss of faith even in the US on the strength of the dollar because of the whole way the government is borrowing and the Fed is printing money. So basically, like I was just noticing a comment on Twitter that what the markets effectively doing is funding a bankrupt government, which is true because they don't have the money to spend, they have to borrow. If it's the same with the corporate, it will go to default, but the governments don't default because the Fed is there to print money. So it becomes ultimately at the end of the day, the whole exercise will be a loss of faith in the US dollar, right? But having said that, now the question you need to ask is this a false alarm, right? Now, why do I say it's a false alarm? Because the markets are betting on growth and inflation. But what if it doesn't happen at all? What if growth doesn't happen? And what if inflation does not happen, like in Japan? So what happens, right? So there again, the problem is different because they don't want that. They don't want growth and inflation. But if it doesn't happen, the Fed will continue to print more and more money. And technically, if it keeps rates at 0%, if the bond yields go down, the US government can borrow as much as it can. Now, if somebody is lending you money at 1% or 2%, for example, I think it makes sense to borrow as much as you can, isn't it? Right. And then if you go to Europe, the 10-year bond yields are at 0% or even slightly higher now because of this thing. But at these levels, why not borrow as much as you can? Because there is no interest to pay. Okay, interest costs are nothing. And at the end of the day, the question to ask is, how would you repay the debt? Everybody will say that we don't need to repay the debt. We continue to keep on rolling over the debt. So, I mean, these are all questions the markets might ask going forward. But currently, at this point of time, there is clearly a fear at the long end of the curve. Now, so typically what happens is when the US Treasury yields rise, the markets believe that there will be move out of emerging currencies into higher yielding US Treasuries. And that's why there is a sell-off in the emerging markets, which has just started. Will this continue? So if you go down to the Indian markets, we have seen the 10-year bond yield rise, but not so much as what the US Treasuries have done. But India has got a different problem as well on that. I'll just explain it to you. And then you have you have a sell-off in equities yesterday. But I think given that the levels have been here, the run-up has been very high here. Is the sell-off a longer-term sell-off or a bear market, inception of a bear market? I don't think so. I'll come to that a little later. And then you have the INR that saw a small movement downwards after appreciating sharply. But having said that, so will it cause financial market instability into India? Now, my own thing is on the bond markets, on the bonds itself, I think it's not the US Treasury yield rising, which is worrying the market. It's the worry of the government borrowing program. And the government is like borrowing huge on a weekly basis towards the end of the year. You are seeing auction sizes running into the state and central government, running into 500 billion and over. So into the last month of the year, you're doing that. Then April, you're starting a fresh borrowing program of total of gross of 12 trillion, right? And so even if RBI buys buys about 3 trillion of bonds like it did this year. So that's 9 trillion of gross, but the banks are like, the banks are now loaded up on government bonds up to 30%. Even if they can actually hold on, even if RBI is giving them leeway to hold on, put the bonds into their hold to maturity bucket to 25% of deposits, but how much can they actually put the government bonds? And from here, I mean, if clearly they are being forced to absorb these because RBI is trying to protect the yield curve still, doing all sorts of various stuff like open market operations, buying bonds, and then simultaneous purchase and sale of bonds, etc., to try and protect. But at the end of the day, there must be a demand at the market level to absorb. And especially when the yields have not gone up at all, then the market is very, very wary of absorbing the bond supply. So if you look at all auctions, if you look at indicators like underwriting commissions, they've gone up substantially. So in the last few auctions, we have seen actually RBI give the underwriters 5 to 7 basis points for bonds as commissions, right? I mean, these are clearly indications of very tough times on the government borrowing program, because on a normal basis, the commissions are actually 0.01 basis points or even half a basis point, right? So there is I mean, you can even say it's negligible, the commissions, but now the commissions are very high because underwriters are worried about devolvement. And even when they get high commissions, they bid at higher levels of yields. And the last auction we saw RBI give a higher cutoff. Clearly, I think there is a lack of demand for bonds, and that is leading to the whole long end shifting up. And then, but even more important, the first indicator that we saw is a very sharp rise in state development loans. The last auction cutoff was at 7.20%. And the low the state loans saw was around 6.4%. So about 80 basis points move up on the state loans. And the RBI is, I mean, clearly, I mean, state loans, you can't really force everybody to go and buy. And even as RBI has a program to buy state loans, they've not really come into the picture yet in full-fledged on that. So obviously, when this happens, it's going to affect corporate bonds as well. So corporate bond yields have also started to rise. We saw the 10-year Bharat bond yields rise sharply, right? Which is indicating that PSU borrowing costs are going up, etc. So that's the problem with the Indian curve. And the RBI governor came last week to allay bond market fears, but the problem is the fears have been there for a while. In fact, the last 2 months, starting December, even November, I would say, the demand has clearly been declined, and RBI has been forcefully supporting the market. The market did give in to some time, saying it's an RBI put and we can hold on. But then at some point of time, it just gave up. And the cue took frost from the rise in US Treasury yield curves. So that's on the bond market side. Then coming down to equities, right? The Sensex and Nifty, I mean, have come off. I mean, the Sensex were over 50,000. It's gone up very sharply. So there was some sell-off, again, taking a cue from the rising US Treasury. But having said that, will this continue much further down the line? At this point of time, there could be a little more weakness, but is it a long-term trend? I don't think so at this point of time. And that's largely because what we have definitely seen in certain sectors is that demand is still is picking up, right? So we saw results from various sectors, which from even from paint companies, etc., which have been very positive in terms of pickup in demand. And so if that continues, then there is definitely a sense of growth going ahead. And the government itself is spending heavily on infrastructure, roads, and other ports, etc. And there is a thrust towards private involvement in the infrastructure sector. That will again lead to, just to digress a bit, it will again lead to a huge amount of strengthening of the corporate bond market, as the government wants the corporate bond market to support the infrastructure sector. But yes, I mean, so in that sense, we are not seeing heavy long-term weakness in equity at this point of time. So you can take the sell-off as temporary, and it should stabilize at some levels. On the INR side itself, we've seen huge amount of flows, and if given that the dollar is still losing faith, then we have we still have a long potential for the flows to actually stay strong, and the rupee is not likely to weaken at this point of time substantially. To some extent, yes, market volatility can take it down, but on a longer term basis, not now, unless we have a heavy fiscal deficit and heavy current account deficit, and then lack of growth, so, and high inflation. So all these are definitely signs to watch out for in India. And yes, to some extent, you will have to keep an eye out, but I don't think it's time to panic on the rupee at this point of time, as well as on equity and only point where you need to really worry about is the bond market, because you still have room for yields to rise further, right? But I'm going to tell you something which might surprise you. Okay, and now if you were to ask me which is the biggest threat, which end of the yield curve is the biggest biggest risk in danger right now, is the short end of the yield curve. So all this while, I think there has been some kind of comfort at the short end, right? Because RBI is going to hold rates at 4%, liquidity is so high, etc. But clearly, what the steepening of the yield curve says, even in India, the yield curves are steepened, and obviously globally, you're seeing the yield curves are steepening. Clearly, what it says is that the given inflation, the short-term rates have to move up, and we don't know when. But the more people borrow at the short end or invest at the short end, the more risk they are taking, because at some point of time it will give. Now, if you take inflation in India, for example, right, you saw core at 5.7%. But what we are definitely seeing on the ground is a very sharp rise in prices everywhere. I think all of you are feeling it. Now, nobody can hide behind some food price falling up and down and say that inflation is down and we can keep accommodative policy, right? Because in India, we are not a developed economy yet, and we still have capital flow controls, and we are still a lot of rates are administered, and there is still a very high local demand, right? So you do, and with all this kind of government borrowing, as well as the need for money at the corporate sector, once as working capital needs increase, and then the economy starts to pick up, right? As I said, there is on the ground signs of demand. Then you would see inflation actually moving up, and with inflation moving up, you cannot really keep on having interest rates at negative, real interest rates at negative levels. And obviously, these are all abnormal levels of rates for India. 3/4 we have never seen earlier. And can RBI keep on printing money? Because one is the biggest drivers of inflation in India are one is money printing by the central bank, and second is the high fiscal deficit of the government. I would even say that it's not the money printing, it's the high fiscal deficit of the government that is actually biggest driver of inflation in India. So when government was actually running such high fiscal deficits just before the 2000s, inflation was running at 15-16%. Then just after the financial crisis, when it took up fiscal deficit to 6.8 to 7%, inflation went to double-digit levels, right? So there is clearly a threat of inflation. So when then the rates will have to be forced to be raised at the short end, raised substantially. So 4% repo rate can technically go to 6%, 7%, etc. And so nobody wants to get caught out at that point of time. Now, so clearly when there is right now, there is a huge amount of money flowing into liquid funds. A lot of corporates are borrowing in the CP market and the short end of the curve because 4 to 5% seems very attractive, right? It's actually very low interest rates for them and all that. But when it comes to rollover, it should not be that they're borrowing again at 6% or 7%. And so typically what can happen is going forward, you can have a very strong flattening of the yield curve. And so the biggest risk I see at this point of time is the close your eyes and buy at the short end, which I think you'll have to start tempering that kind of a risk going ahead. So you buy the short end, but at the extreme short. You have to live with such low rates if you are worried about rates. So maybe 3 months and 6 months rather than 1 year, even 1 year or 2 years. And then as yields start to, when things unfold, you can always buy at whatever levels are there rather than take excessive short-end positions. If you're an issuer here, then I would really recommend you to start issuing at the much longer end of the yield curve rather than at the short end. And investors investing at the short end are better off investing in the extreme short end and not even taking 1 year kind of risks or 1 or 2 year kind of risks on portfolios. So having said that, I think let's leave the floor open to the questions if you have any. Clear, we have a recording as well, and the presentations are available to you. So I'm happy to take questions. Okay, so if you have questions, you can either raise your hand or you can type on the chat box, and I will read out the questions and answer them.
We have a question from Prasanna. So I'll unmute him. Yeah.
Sure.
Am I audible?
Yeah, you are audible,
sir.
Yeah, hi, sir. So just wanted to understand, you mentioned if you are an investor and stay put at the extreme short end, maybe even lower than the 1 year from a debt investment or a fixed income investment perspective, would there be a possibility of doing some sort of strategy in terms of barbelling or a roll down fund or something of that sort, which if people have a longer duration for their debt investments?
No, I would suggest that, I mean, all these structures look nice on paper and theory, but when you want to put it in practice, actually it all falls flat because the returns tend to stay extremely volatile even then, right? So what I suggest is stay extreme short. And once the long end of the curve stabilizes it at some levels, it's better to invest at the long end rather than the short end. Right.
Okay.
But you would have to have a fix on where the long end is going to stabilize, and that will happen, I see, only in the first quarter to second quarter of this year, of the new fiscal year.
Okay, but do we see that the 1.6% on the US Treasury has sort of gone on the extreme side of the end, and should it sort of come back to maybe?
Yeah, so that's what I meant. Correct. That's what I meant by false alarm. So whether it's a false alarm, we still don't know, right? So I would rather wait to see where it's going to stabilize. Will there be a fresh wave of selling, etc.? So the latest data points came, and I think on Friday, I think we saw consumer demand picking up as well as inflation staying down in the US. So those are good data points. We would have to see how the February payrolls behave. You also had extreme cold weather there. So those are all some seasonal factors. So would the sell-off be much more widespread, and then will it go to say 2% and settle down? I think it's very too early to say. I mean, if there are chartists here, if they're charting it, they would say it's broken out, etc. But I'm not so well versed on the charts side. Rather look at the fundamentals. So we would have to wait and see whether it's a false alarm. You should not rule out a false alarm. But right now, if you ask me, would you put the money on a false alarm? I mean, I think it's going to be very, either you'll have to have extreme conviction on that's a false alarm, which I don't have. And if you don't have extreme conviction, it's a false alarm, then you just wait and watch.
Okay. And what would be the normalization level for the 10-year given the borrowing programs and extension of the FRB and glide path, maybe for another 5 years? For the 10-year, what do we consider the normal level to be? As in, we are already now over 6.2%. Do you think 6.5 is the level where we should normalize given the 12 lakh crore borrowing and the 5-year of glide path that we have taken, or
no, I think it should be higher? Yeah, it has to be higher. It has to be closer to 7% and above initially as a first stop. And then we'll have to wait and see how the whole thing behaves, whether the economy is growing, and then because there is definitely very strong signs of inflation in the country. I don't think anybody can ignore that. I mean, because the one is that there is no room to cut taxes. Fuel prices have gone up substantially. That's leading to follow through inflation everywhere. You have labor costs moving up. You have raw material costs moving up for producers. Everywhere, some of them are able to pass it on in terms of margins. Some of them are not able to pass it on. So clearly the signs are there. I don't think anybody can act. And one more round of higher food inflation can take up inflation clearly to 8%, 9% levels at a higher end. So we need to see so where it can stabilize. But definitely, even at these levels, 630, 640, I think it's too low at this point of time, given the huge borrowing that we are going to see, right? And if RBI continues to buy more bonds in India, I think that kind of money, liquidity, can really push up inflation very strongly up. And yeah, I think we still haven't seen normalization. Even 6.5 is not a normal point.
Okay, so the sterilization of liquidity would continue. They did a VRR, and now maybe is it a possibility of doing an MSS, or
they should actually? Ideally, I think MSS is the right tool for them, because MSS is very, very clearly targeted at absorbing FX flows. Okay, correct. So they have brought in so much of FX flows this year. I think RBI would have infused about almost 5+ trillion of liquidity through FX purchases, right? Correct. So that amount of sterilization cannot be done constantly through reverse repos or even long term. They need to start issuing MSS bonds.
Okay, and just maybe last question on the USD INR. So do we think there would be a depreciating bias given, or the appreciating bias rather, if RBI stops intervening in the FX markets and the flows continue unabated? So we have seen maybe a moderation in Feb, but if they sort of come back in March, April in terms of either FII or FDI, then there would be an appreciating bias to the rupee, or then maybe on the other hand, the inflation will come back and then the inflation differential will actually take it back to lower levels.
Right now, I would say there's still an appreciating bias. We still I think RBI will also have to allow it to start going back to whatever levels it wants to, because they've done enough of intervention and there's huge amount of liquidity. They're also struggling to cope up with that. So once it's settled down at whatever level it needs to settle down, and then they can actually start thinking then what to intervene. See, largely because the longer you protect the rupee from falling than from rising, then the FIs, I mean, clearly you sense that, I mean, It's like you hold, like RBI was holding the government bond at 6%. The market was clearly sensing that you cannot hold on at 6% for so long, right? So at one point of time, it had to give. Now it's 620, and there is no reason it will go to 650 or it will go to 7%, right? So same thing. You might as well. So when you see the rupee is being protected, they take on all kinds of positions in terms of just naked currency positions, and then once they know a sense that they have to let go of this whole thing, then they just once they let go, they'll just sell it off and come back, take the profits and move. So RBI has to have a sense of this. Continuously protecting the currency doesn't make any sense at this point of time.
Okay, and just maybe last one. It's not a part of the, I think, the seminar, but what is our view on gold given the weakness in the dollar? Maybe interest rates
Okay.
now sort of
Good
going
question.
higher.
Yeah, I think gold has not done too well from after it touched highs. It's actually come off sharply, right? But I think that there is still a good scope for gold to actually become a safe haven kind of an asset, especially with this kind of market behavior. So we saw one end, like I was mentioning, the first point was the bitcoins, right? Cryptos are getting more and more traction, and so RBI themselves came and said, but they can't ignore cryptos if it's going to be a world standard. So they can't ignore crypto. They'll have to have their own form of digital currency, either that or they allow some kind of cryptos to start coming into the country. All right. You cannot stay protected out for too long on that. So clearly, I think the weakness in gold could be an opportunity to buy into that. But then again, it's better to buy when the gold is starting to appreciate, maybe 10% higher rather than on a depreciation basis. So we can wait and see where it actually stabilizes. I don't think there's a rush to buy gold.
Okay, got it. Thank you so much, sir. Thanks.
Welcome. Where are you calling from, Krishna?
I'm calling from Bombay only, from Valid as well.
Valid as well. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I have registered for your program, so
thank you.
I've been undergoing the training and all.
Oh, very good. Excellent. Okay. I hope you find that useful.
Yeah, it has been very, very useful.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah.
So we have a next question from Nisha Sharma.
Yeah.
Ma'am, I'm unmuting yourself. You can ask the question.
Arjun, hi, this is Jaydev. I'm actually using my wife's email ID.
Oh, sure.
So, Arjun, thanks for the presentation. Just wondering, Arjun, from a US Fed perspective, what is it that you would want to hear in terms of a verbal intervention to sort of assuage the feelings of the bond markets, stroke financial markets?
No, I don't think
next week is going to be event packed. We will also have Jerome Powell, who will be commenting and stuff like that. So what is it that you would like to hear?
No, I don't think the Fed can now say anything, right? Clearly, I mean, the markets have heard enough. The Fed has the kind of guidance given by the Fed is very, very clear. So unless they come and say that we are going to do and we are going to buy so much of long 10-year bonds or 30-year bonds to bring down the yield, I think that's the only thing that the Fed can actually do. And they have to buy in enough quantity so that the markets really can't see, because the US Treasury market is it's like global, right? Anybody can sell the bond, and if the Fed, I mean, how much can the Fed fight the globe? We don't know, but you could have more and more central banks, actually global central banks like China. I'm definitely, I think is could even start to unwind its treasury holdings. I think they've already started doing a lot, right? So that's the only thing that the Fed can come and tell the markets is, I'll buy all the long-term bonds in enough quantity so that the yield comes down, like what the Bank of Japan is trying to do. I mean, they're trying to maintain the 10-year at 0%. But even with that 0% target, actually the 10-year JGB has gone to 15 basis points, 0.15%, right? So basically you're fighting the market here, but then you'll have to do it in such a scale that the market starts to say, okay, fine. At these levels of yields, we don't want to be short any longer.
Right. So essentially, the markets will do what they have to do
Yeah,
without
absolutely.
necessarily looking over their shoulder or
Right.
just ignoring the Fed completely.
Absolutely. At the short end, they can't do anything because the Fed has complete control at the short end. At the long end, their markets have control.
Right. Right. And
Right.
and also, Arjun, what are the 1 or 2 signals that you would watch out for, which would tell you that a market accident is on its way?
At this point of time, what I would watch out for is clear signs of further economic weakness, and the corporates actually starting to guide for lower growth.
Okay.
Right. So these are the 2 clear signs of these are the 2 clear worry signs, because if this is going to happen, then everything that the government and the central banks are doing is being negated, and they just don't have enough ammunition to move forward on this.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
So
Okay.
yeah. Okay.
Yep. Thanks, Tan. Thanks.
Welcome. We have a question here from Arshal here. Just had a question. Would you see a decrease in the public savings scheme interest rates if inflation continues to go up? Sounds okay. So yeah, when inflation actually rises and rates and public savings scheme go down, then it's not a good sign, isn't it? Because that means the government is taxing people by lowering rates when inflation is higher. So I think at some point of time, they already in the budget, they already gave some softs to senior citizens at higher interest rates. So here, I think they would have to start to increase small savings rates. Because one is, if they sense the market is not willing to take up their borrowing, they'll want more inflows into small savings rates. That means PPF and post office. And actually, they should start doing incentivizing people to actually start investing in small savings rather than getting the market. And one more thing, one more sign is that the retailization of government bonds. So they want more and more retail participation in government bonds. And so if that can be facilitated, then that will provide a very good alternative to the institutional participation in the government bonds. But we have to see how much the retail will start to take up government bonds on their own, and whether they can actually provide that much of relief to the institutional market in terms of supporting the government borrowing. So these are all some questions that needs to be answered. But yeah, I mean, if they cut small savings, I think they'll have to raise it again, at least next year. I see them starting to raise small savings next year. Yeah, here I'm getting a question from Sharmal. When we talk about stability scenarios, what could have changed this in coming months? What corporates should look at if they have to decide on their investment from 6 months to a 1 year time frame? Right. So what could have changed the coming 6 months? Okay, so what can change in the coming 6 months is clearly, I think we could see yields moving up, interest rates to move up, and then maybe rate hikes to start next year. So once that happens, then you could have markets settle down at some levels. So corporates are looking to invest in 6 months to 1 year time frame. I think, like I said, right now they're better off being, if they have a 6 months horizon, they're better off being in a 6 months kind of a product, maybe a CP or a liquid fund. They're investing directly 6 months product, and then maybe reinvest after 6 months wherever the yields are. They can start to look, and clearly, I mean, if the yields have moved up enough, then the longer end of the curve is a much better position to be in than the shorter end of the yield curve. I hope this answers the question.
So we have our next question from Vinamra.
Yep.
So I'll unmute you. Sir.
Sure.
Hi, Arjun. Vinamra this side from Darashaw.
Yeah,
So,
hi.
So as you also mentioned that you sense the GSEC will go to 7%, and even our technical chartist was very confident that post yesterday's close, GSEC should go to 6.94 levels.
Okay.
So that the view of our chartist is. So the question is, today if I talk to any issuer for a long, say 7 to 10 year kind of a bond issue, and I advise them it's better to pay 10 basis points rather than paying 50 basis points, say 2 months, 3 months down the line when yields go up. So the issuer's dilemma is today credit offtake is not happening. If he raise this 10-year paper or say 7-year bond, and then he keeps this money in liquid or any other short mutual fund scheme, he'll be having a huge negative carry to it. So again, his thing is whether to borrow today, paying a 20 basis over, or to wait for say 3, 6 months, 4 months when credit offtake happens and pay that 50 basis points over and that time borrow a 7, 10 year. So what's
Okay.
your sense? How you if you put yourself in an issuer's shoes, what will you do? You will go for a long issue, bond issue, or you will wait for time for yields to stabilize? Thank you.
Actually, the way I would argue for I agree with your point. The way I would argue it is that the 10 or 20 basis points that they are paying now is the risk protection that they're getting by collecting money at the long end of the curve, right? So what they would need to look at it as a cost of risk, right? It's like all of them hedge, right? They hedge the rupee, they hedge, technically they can hedge borrowing as well if they're borrowing floating rate, right? And they're used to hedge costs. So you should tell them it's a hedge cost rather than anything else, because it's better to have long-term liquidity now than short-term liquidity.
Yeah. So
But obviously, if it's a working capital funding, it's different, right? Because that's a need of the hour kind of a thing. So that can be done through the short end of the curve. But if it's going to be in terms of investments, it's going to be in terms of lending, etc., then you're rather off paying some fallen margins, net interest income if you're an NBFC, for that risk protection that you're getting by borrowing at the longer end of the curve at this point of time.
So here, I agree with you, but here again, I use the same logic when I was trying to so-called convince them. But here, their view is tomorrow, if yields move up, then their lending rate will also move up accordingly.
Right.
Right. So that more or less that NIM remains the same. So then here comes the question: if today they borrow and they 3-6 months on the line, credit offtake moves up and yields also move up, then the NIM will go up exponentially.
Right.
So again, this is a catch-22 situation for them
Okay,
to work
fine.
for that exponential NIM or to keep working on that 3-4-5% NIM they used to get in the past.
Okay, that's some very difficult to answer from their perspective. I guess they have a point here as well. Maybe because they are also seeing a lot of cash that is there in the book, especially the cash-rich funds who are not really starved for cash. Then you have one sector that is really starved for cash, and they don't have any investment plans. So what do they do with the money, right? So then they're better off actually starting to time the borrowing when credit offtake is happening. But for those who are actually what is it called, continuously, for example, NBFCs, if it's an NBFC, if it's a lender, they have to have continuous borrowing. There is no question about it. So for them, they can replace the short end of the curve borrowings with the long end. It can actually lead to some kind of a margin erosion in the short term, but it provides that much more protection. And we have seen when stress happens, right? And especially when, like I said, when we are talking about US Treasury yields, we are seeing the first bout of volatility. Now we don't know whether this can continue. So if it technically goes to 2% tomorrow, for example, I don't know what your chartist has view on the US 10-year. If you have, it will be good for everyone to hear. But if it goes to 2%, then clearly, I mean, you can see huge worry lines across markets, right? And so we don't want to see those worry lines, right? Because one is the markets tend to stop funding completely when things go turn extremely volatile. We have seen time over and over again. So you don't want that to happen. So maybe a good and the way the COVID has shaped up is most of the corporates and lenders are exposed to very, very high levels of borrowing at the short end of the curve.
Right.
So I think they need to start to unwind that kind of a gap.
Understood. Thank you.
Yep.
So we have a next question from Rohit Goyal. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah. Hi, Rohit.
Yeah, hi Arjun, how are you?
All fine. Thanks.
No, Arjun, thanks for organizing this. Quite informative, and we get a different perspective. So my question is that Arjun, next quarter there are some massive FMP maturities lined up, and that's a fresh money which will get released in the system because that money is not coming from selling existing bonds. I mean, those bonds are just going to mature, and that's a fresh money which will come in the system. So don't you think that money will create demands for bonds, especially in the 1 to 3 year segment, and that will pull down the yields in that segment?
Now, I mean, when you're talking about FMP maturities, so the way it works is like this, right? The corporates have to pay their maturities, isn't it?
Yeah.
So that means they'll have fresh borrowing as well. So I think that will take care of itself if they come to the bond market to borrow. See, right now, it makes sense for them to borrow at the borrow in the bond market because the MCLR rates are still very high, right? And there's a huge arbitrage in borrowing coming to the corporate bond market to borrow, right? So going to banks doesn't make sense for them. So at some level, when they believe that market funding is not there, they go to MCLR, then this can create a fresh demand. But if they come back to the market to borrow, I think it will take care of the whole. It will take care of itself. But anyway, just from my own understanding, what is the total amount of FMPs that are coming into maturity?
So roughly, if you look at Arjun, it's close to around 50,000 crore in the next quarter itself.
50,000 crores, is it?
Yeah.
Okay. No, I don't think that. I think that number is too small for the market to really worry about. Yeah. I don't think it's going to really increase the demand substantially and make yields actually stay stable or come down. But like I said, I mean, the short end of the curve at this point of time is okay. We've already seen yields move up, right? So it's not as if the yields have not moved up. But it should not be that, there is a panic in terms of very, very sharp rise in short end yields. Which is not seen at this point of time. But the point is, it's always better to be keep a watch out for that rather than anything else. And you're definitely not going to see rates come down in the next 3 to 6 months at the short end.
So we have a question on a chat box from one of the participants. He's asking, like, is barbell strategy a best way to tackle this situation?
Yeah, so I had answered this question on the barbell, right? No, barbell is not a good strategy, I would feel. I would rather stay at the extreme short for a couple of quarters maybe, and then take a call from there because you're losing nothing in this except a bit of carry. But now getting on a barbell strategy, really you'll have to work out various kinds of scenarios, and where the volatility can come in at one point of time is difficult. And like we say, if the 10 years normal level itself is about 7%, right? Then you would have to wait for that to happen if you want to invest at the longer end of the curve. So you don't know where you want to actually position yourself. So just wait. Better not to take on all kinds of strategies unless you're extremely sure about how the whole curve will behave over the next 6 to 12 months, right? So I have a question here from Roshan. What's your view on RBI bonds? Whether investors should invest in RBI bonds or corporate bonds? Okay, so RBI bonds are long end of the curve, long term, and you're locked in, right? I think they have a floating rate bond as well, which is there. Yeah, so you can actually, but given that RBI bonds have just one maturity, I think it makes sense to have maybe a mix of both RBI bonds and corporate bonds if you really want to look at it. But having said that, I would prefer always corporate bonds if you can assess the risk, and also because you get various options for you to actually look at corporate bonds in terms of maturity, in terms of structures, etc., rather than just one bond issued by the RBI. But yes, I mean, if you really want to play it safe, RBI bonds, you can not have a better risk than the RBI bonds. I have a question here from Sagar. What is your view on UPPCL bond trading at 9% plus YTM rather than investments into debt funds at this juncture? Okay. Now, I had written a note on the last week's search for yields, which is direct bonds or debt funds. So the question about UPPCL is, see, the UPPCL is a state government guaranteed bond. And this is dependent on the UP state funding the entity, because the power corporation itself does not have money. They run into deep losses, as everybody knows. So till now, the UP government has been funding it. There has been no issues at all. And so it's seen as a very safe. And there is one structure which everybody talks about as RBI guaranteed, which they say is it's not guaranteed by RBI because RBI never guarantees any bonds. They cannot by constitution guarantee any bonds. It's just that there is a funding mechanism where if there is no money into the escrow account, then the trustees call upon the RBI to fund the UP government, and the government actually funds the escrow account. Right? So that's the structure of this. So it's not an RBI guaranteed bond. But having said that, UPPCL bonds, if you're comfortable with the credit and the fact that if you're thinking that the UP government will continue to support the entity and pay that and make sure that the bond investors are serviced, you're fine, because 9% is a good structure. You get 9% per year coupon, and then you don't have to worry about fluctuations, right? But you must realize here that the UP government, it's also all state governments are in deep fiscal issues. They don't have money, and that central government does not have money. The state governments have less money. The borrowing costs are moving up. So as I was saying, state loans are being 10-year state loans are now 7.2%. The borrowing costs are rising substantially. Banks are not funding state government guaranteed entities because they owe them a lot of money. So they come to the market. So if they have to redeem a bond, they have to reissue a bond. Now, if they don't find takers for the reissue, then they might delay on interest and all that. So you would have to have a very strong sense of the risk you're taking on these bonds. So we have rated the UPPCL on a credit spread score in our market watch. If you go there, you can see it if you're a paid subscriber. And we have rated it high risk. But having said that, high risk is high returns. So if you're willing to take that higher risk, you can get the higher returns. Yeah. So that's where it is. But if you're willing to take the higher risk, then clearly, I mean, I think it's makes much more sense than investing in a bond fund, which we can show you at this point of time. It can show you a good amount of volatility in terms of NAV.
So Mr. Santosh wants to ask a question.
So
Go ahead, sir.
Hey, thank you. So, Arjun, I want to understand how this scenario would impact Bank Nifty. Specifically, there is a ambitious privatization target of our government, and if the valuations of banks sharply fall, would it force the government to push it and again come back to borrowing? So, is it a vicious circle that we are looking at?
oh yeah, yeah. It is a vicious circle because I think they've got an ambitious target for disinvestment this year, 2.2 lakh crores, right?
Yep.
Then you of that, I think LIC can form a very large chunk. Then you have banks. Then I think they're also looking at disinvesting BPCLs and RMDs of the world. Yes, I mean they have an ambitious privatization target, but I don't think banks are really too much into figuring into this part of thing because they know they're going to face a lot of issues with the unions, etc. So I think their concentration levels would first be the big ticket disinvestments and then come down to these. See, banks itself, I think what they're doing is to some extent, right? Keeping 5 big banks, which they can monitor, and then hiving off the smaller banks to the private sector. And that's largely because of the fact that it's difficult for regulators to regulate so many banks. And second is, it makes it that much so competitive, the whole environment, right? But having said that, the banking sector itself is going through a whole host of technological changes, behavioral patterns, etc. That needs to be seen in context. You have open banking and you have lots of startups, fintechs coming up and disrupting business plans, the whole stuff, right?
I mean, this yield moving up sharply, coupled with the existing load of NPAs, like we had a huge run up in the whole Bank Nifty post budget, right? How does it look actually? I mean,
okay. No. Bank Nifty itself, see, you really have to look at it in perspective now. Most of the public sector banks are invested in government bonds. About 30% of their deposits are going into government bond investments, right? So, because they haven't given credit at all. Okay. The second is that the private sector banks have wholly embraced retail. Okay. And there are cracks appearing at the retail level. I mean, Axis Bank came and clearly said that they are seeing a lot of stress at the retail level starting to show up. It's the only bank that really, showcased its retail stress. Others haven't done so. Either they got better lending standards or we don't know. But I would suspect they're also lending to the same people. There's so much of competition. So we would have to see how the retail behaves. Now, hopefully, if the economy picks up, the retail can start to, retail stress is not going to show up. But if it doesn't, then there's a problem, right? So I would be careful of Bank Nifty. I think we just have to play the charts.
Got it. I mean, any thoughts on which sectors would be at high risk with this kind of, like movements in the bond market, or it would be like same for all sectors across, or?
No, wherever the infrastructure sector, for example, because wherever the funding requirements are through debt, they are at the highest risk. Clearly.
Got it. Yeah. Thank you, Arjun. Thank you.
Welcome.
We have a question from Prasanna again. Hello. Go ahead.
Hi, sir. Just maybe 3 more questions.
Yeah, welcome. Sure.
Yeah. So one was now that we are in a bear flattening sort of scenario, should we think maybe the medium term end of the curve is something that we could maybe take protection in or stay put at, if not at the extreme short end, because that is at risk of moving up. The long end has already gone up, and I understand the medium curve has also moved up by 50-75 basis points. But is that a possibility where we could maybe have our positions in the 3 to 7 year bucket?
Yeah, I think, see, what I'm saying is that before you take any kind of positions with a strategy, it's better to
Mhm.
let about a quarter or a couple of quarters pass.
Okay.
And that means at the extreme short end, I mean, say 3 month CP or treasury bill or a liquid fund or something like that.
Mhm.
Then you can take a call from there. But yes, I mean, then you will see some values actually appearing. In fact, it's better the yields rise and stabilize. Then you can be investing with some kind of assurance. I mean, less risk, because at these levels there is kind of risk that you're running on because you're. So remember, it's fallen to extreme lows, and so we don't. So it's better it stabilizes. Even if it stabilizes at these levels, you're fine for the next quarter. But at least you know where you're investing at, rather than just going blindly and putting on strategies, because you don't know where it can go and stabilize.
Okay, got it.
Right.
Also, a question on these newer structures. A lot of corporates and NBFCs are now actually coming up with market-linked debentures and covered bonds and credit-enhanced structures, and they are generally on the short duration side, 18 to 24 months, maybe 30 months, and those have these higher ratings than the uh, underlying rating. So, is that something that could be looked at if the rating is AA plus or higher?
Okay, now we are evaluating many of these structures, and we see that one is the credit enhancement comes from things like real estate or share pledge or something like that. And clearly, if you're a small investor, if things go wrong, you can't invoke them. And we are seeing things go wrong, especially on loan against shares. The mutual fund industry had a huge tough time convincing investors of their safety. So I would be careful. I would rather look at the underlying entity, see where the cash flows are coming from, and what can actually disrupt the cash flows, rather than going for, at this point of time, on the credit enhancement of the structures.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because CRISIL
So
had
it is a case by case basis. You will have to look at a case by case basis, and unless it's a credit watertight credit guarantee by a very strong cash rich entity, then it's going to be very difficult.
correct. Because CRISIL had their debt, I think, outlook a couple of days back, and they had said that credit enhancement is something, and that is an innovation which will maybe bring in a lot of investments into the debt markets. So the risk to
Yes,
that
correct.
is the understanding of the underlying
Yeah.
also has to be equally good.
Understanding of the underlying and where the enhancement comes from. So they were actually tom-tomming a credit guarantee entity,
Correct.
right? So if
Yeah.
if it's a government-run entity, right, or SBI is running that, then if you're sure that of the legal covenants that you can actually invoke the guarantee from SBI,
Mhm.
then that's fine. Yeah, so that becomes clearly a credit enhancement. You're taking on SBI risk than anything else. But anything else, then you'll have to see what the kind of what could entail invoking the whole structure.
Got it.
Yeah.
Third is on we have seen credit growth very, very subdued now for almost the last 12 to 18 months at 6% and lower, and maybe inching up a bit here and there. Whereas the deposit growth has been above 10% for the same period of time. And now with the government coming up with such a large borrowing, but at the same time they have also said that they would be doing a lot of infrastructural spend and capex. So, what is our understanding whether this will lead to a crowding out for the private sector from a borrowings perspective, or a crowding in for the private sector from a capex perspective?
Yeah. Okay. So you have see, capex funding requirements is positive, in that sense there is requirement for investments, right? That would mean capex would mean more of long-term issues. Okay, but obviously that it will come at a price, and which is good for investors, because it gives you an opportunity to look at much more structures than what it's giving you now, right? So you can actually provide that much. It can provide what is it called? It can widen the market itself in terms of more investors participating in kind of structures. So yes, I mean, it can actually help deepen the corporate bond market if you were say so, because you can say supply creates its own demand. On the crowding outside, yes, I mean, the way the crowding out can clearly, I mean, we have always had this question of crowding out because the government is borrowing so heavy and banks are only lending to the government. That means they don't have money to lend to anybody else, right? So then crowding out, then clearly, I mean, there to some extent, it is possible that because the banks are lending only to the government, the corporates go to the alternative markets like corporate bond market, etc., to come. It can actually widen the markets and deepen the markets. Yeah, so it can have a positive effect rather than a negative effect if capex cycle starts to improve.
Okay, and then how do we sort of try to make some reforms so that we get a lot of foreign participation? So the current levels of utilization of the debt limits are looked at from both the government as well as the corporate bond. I think they are very low at about 30, 40 or even lower. And they have been going down month on month.
Yes.
And we have also seen the outflows happening from the debt market. So what is it that the foreign investors are looking at? And we have seen China getting a lot of foreign debt investments post their inclusion in passive indices. So is that one thing, or is there more that needs to be done so as to get these foreign investors attracted to Indian debt?
It's a good question, actually. See, FIs are most of them are opportunistic. So when they see, we have seen FI limits actually in corporate bonds actually go up to 70%, 80% types, 70, 75% it's gone up to at one point of time, right? And that's largely because they had a view on currency and all that stuff. But this year, this time, even with the rupee actually seeing a lot of traction, they're not really, because they're worried about the government fiscal deficit, and it's like risen sharply. So at some levels of yields, when it turns attractive for them, they might just want to come back and increase their exposure. To a very large extent, if you globally, if you go and look at how CDS spreads have moved for Indian corporates, it's fallen very sharply, right? So clearly, there is a lot of demand for Indian corporate bonds, USD denominated. Masala bonds are also being favored, right? Corporates are able to raise masala bonds. But coming down to India itself, there's some issues on withholding tax and limit structures and stuff like that. But more and more, I think the more important sense is that we are still worried about the liquidity and the currency, and the fact that they may not able to, with this kind of borrowing, the yields might just tend to rise rather than fall, and they get the hit on both sides of the spectrum, with yields rising as well as the currency not doing too well, right? So I would suspect it's a lot more sentiment driven than anything else, rather than any kind of reforms that is required here. But yes, I mean, at all points of time, if they can actually widen the market, make it more transparent, make it easier for them to start dealing, improve traction for digitized platform like ours, things like that, then obviously I think you can see a large amount of interest coming into the market. Yes, and inclusion in the MSCI indices could be one positive factor as well. And maybe issuance of sovereign bonds that can also help, because it can give the flavor of India to the global markets.
Correct, got it. Maybe just the last one, in terms of flows, we have seen the DIIs actually selling from equity and not participating even to a very large extent on the debt side. So I think the monthly flows have been very, very tapered in the last several months on the debt side as well from DIIs. So where are the flows sort of going? As in, is it going? Do we anticipate it's going to the banks and just lying in the savings accounts, or because the deposit rates are also not very attractive? So or
No,
is
we're
it
not-
the direct
yeah.
equity?
I think it's going to
trading?
direct equity, alternatives, PMS on the equity side. And on the debt side, institutional at the very short end. So I think all these liquid and ultra shorts, the world doing extremely well. But also there is a lot more of retail participation in the corporate bonds, right? Direct participation. So I think it's like going across like these. So it's just getting shifted out from one investor segment to another.
Got it. Okay, thank you so much again,
Yeah,
sir.
welcome. Yeah. Any more questions, Ketan?
No, sir, we don't have any
No.
more questions.
Okay. Then thank you all for joining in today at a very short notice as well. And but I think it was pretty informative for me as well, because the kind of questions I was answering was very, very to the point and very thought-provoking. And I look forward to actually such kind of interactions. And I'm very happy Prasanna and Rohit and everybody else came out with very good points. So the recording will be there. And so continue to use INR bonds. And just to give you more perspective, our Market Watch screen, we put out a lot of information on corporate bonds. So please do take a look at it if you are investing for directly or for your clients, and use our order books. You can put in your bids. We want to encourage price discovery so that you're always sure that you're transacting at the right prices. And also clearly, we keep sending out our reports that are being well read, so I don't have to really this thing. But where you can actually gain on the ground advantages through placing bids and offers on our order book as well. Right. Thank you very much. And have a good weekend.
Thank you, sir.